My name is Matt Phillips. I am the host. Today's webinar is Your Questions, Expert Answers, the Seismic Shift in Cyber Threats, Part 2. I want to frame that we had this webinar as a result of our last webinar where people had more questions. So every time we get more questions, we want to keep bringing value through these webinars. This webinar is scheduled for a half an hour. Typically, it goes after that half hour if people have questions. Just know that we always want to be mindful of everybody that's tuned in's time. So you'll get the bulk of what we have at 30 minutes. We welcome you to stay after 30 minutes if the questions are what you want to know, or if you have a question and it hasn't been answered, please stay. We'll answer that question. First, I want to introduce our experts. We have Rob Schenk, who is Cybersecurity Advisor at Intelligent Technical Solutions, and Ryan McBride, Channel Sales Lead, Field Effect. I was going to say something personal about you, Rob, and Ryan, but we're short on time. So just say Ryan loves dogs and Rob loves martial arts. Is that a fair statement, Rob? Did I get that right?
Sounds good, Matt.
Okay. I want to get to know you a little bit. All right. So let's move on. So the big talk in the communities is about AI. And the question that we're going to start off with, Rob, is how is AI shaping the cybersecurity landscape?
Well, with AI, there's it's a two-edged sword on one side. On the one side, there's some good, very positive benefits, and there's also kind of like a flip side to it. It can also be misused and provide a lot of risk for companies. So I'm going to kind of focus on the good part of what AI brings to the table. So it really kind of does a great job at very specific things. So for being able to kind of recognize patterns over a very large amount of data, it's really good at that. And it as from the perspective of cyber defenders, it really helps us kind of expand our capabilities kind of in an exponential manner. So it helps us to apply our cybersecurity expertise and then to cascade that across this really broad data set. The other thing that it does is that it really allows us to use kind of common language, natural language to ask questions, translate them into kind of actionable responses. And these responses can come back in a simplified and kind of a non-technical manner that really allows us to expand our level of expertise and reduce overall risk.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, we're using AI for high precise tasks that could be used to help secure businesses from cyber threats and from bad guys. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's really able to kind of allow us to kind of pinpoint patterns and see common threads and then piece things together in a way that we wouldn't normally have that level of visibility, especially in a manual manner, right? In this case, we're able to blow it out and ask very specific targeted questions across a very large swath of data and get back really actionable responses that we can do something with.
Sounds good. So I mean, I hate to ask this question because you're talking about how AI is helping us. Is AI not helping in some way? Because you're telling how we're deploying the robots and the robots are protecting the businesses. Is AI a liability at all? I mean, I should ask Ryan that question maybe. Ryan, is AI a liability?
Yeah, I can share a little bit more about that. We are seeing some trends on the cybercrime side of things with relation to AI. And I'd love to share a little bit more about what we're seeing today and what we may see in the future. So today, something a lot of people are commonly familiar with are large language processing models like ChatGPT. And what we can see today is ChatGPT assisting cyber criminals to create better phishing campaigns. So if you've ever played around with the tool, the ChatGPT solution, you can both send prompts asking it to create something for you. But you can also provide it with some data in which it can analyze and then, for instance, write in the same style. So if we're thinking about a phishing campaign or a phishing email that you may receive, instead of it coming from somebody in a tone you may be unfamiliar with, if somebody had access to your email, for instance, they could copy into a platform like ChatGPT various types of emails from the person they want to impersonate, and then ask the AI tool like ChatGPT to create a phishing email in a very convincing manner, very similar to the person who they're trying to impersonate.
So I'm going to jump in and ask you for some clarification on that because it sounds very devious. So let's say the bad guy gets into the infrastructure, right? You tell me if I'm right so far, and then they copy all the emails in, and then AI looks at all the emails and then they would say to AI, "Hey, send an email that sounds like this person, but but weave in an ask from me through this new checking account." So then AI, and I'm making assumptions here, Ryan, you're the expert, goes, "Hey, Bill, I love that fishing trip. Hope you catch a trout, by the way." And so the tonality sounds like that coworker, but it is essentially a thief. Am I out in like left field here? Or?
No, you nailed it, Matt. That's exactly the way that it can be used today to help create better phishing emails. And we're starting to see that pattern emerge from cyber criminals. So another thing that we're seeing cyber criminals do are leverage stolen data to try and figure out what passwords you could be using now. So one of the ways, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit later, soon in the future here, that cyber criminals can take advantage of stolen data. So if they steal a bunch of passwords, then they can use AI to create guesses at what new passwords may be from old passwords. So they can use the power of these generative chat tools like ChatGPT to analyze old passwords and come up with potential new passwords, and use that to expedite, cracking passwords for new user accounts or things like that. And lastly, we hear about AI creating malware. Now, today, tools like ChatGPT have made efforts to disallow the platform for generating malicious applications, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. However, the malware that is being generated by these platforms isn't yet incredibly sophisticated, but it doesn't mean things won't necessarily evolve in the future.
So Ryan, I feel like we could do a whole webinar on AI, but I'm going to move us along because we're a little short on time. So I would ask Chloe to advance to the next slide, and that is.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to chime in, with regards to AI, I think what's most important for an executive or a business owner to think about is, how are you going to protect yourself against this sort of stuff, right? So you want to make sure that you have a cybersecurity solution that's protecting against this kind of a strategy or threat. You want to kind of future-proof your security stack, right? So that's kind of, I think, one of the conversations to have is, making sure that you're investing properly in a forward-looking security stack that's going to be able to kind of preempt some of this stuff. So, for example, you mentioned, the initial kind of example was, hey, someone getting into your email. Well, having a security stack that is able to prevent that takeover from happening in the first place obviates that, right? It just reduces that threat and eliminates it. So those are the kind of things that business owners want to be thinking about.
Okay, and then this plays well into this next question. How is AI shaping the cybersecurity landscape? So it sounds like, based on what I'm hearing so far, you can add more if you like, Rob. AI can both replicate a tone internally of a business, or they can use AI in certain ways to potentially mimic potential passwords. Are there other ways AI is shaping cybersecurity, Rob?
Well, one of the things that we're starting to, I haven't seen a huge amount of examples of this, but one of the things that may be coming, and then Ryan, feel free to chime in, is around, cyber criminals using the AI to create, malicious malware that then can be used to attack, because it also can generate code as well. Maybe Ryan, we can talk about that briefly, and then we can maybe move on.
Yeah, absolutely. AI will see in the future increasingly assist attackers to automate and scale their cyber attacks. So they're able to complete more advanced attacks faster than humans would manually by completing a series of techniques in a short period of time. So as Rob mentioned, this is why really from a detection standpoint, countering that effort with artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions from a defensive perspective that can analyze the indicators of compromise and indicators of attack are crucial for business owners when they're thinking about what to do with their cybersecurity.
So before we move on, I want to encourage everybody that's joined us for this webinar, please feel free to jump in with any questions. Every question is super encouraged, and I guarantee you that if you ask a question, 2 or 3 other people watching probably will benefit from that. So I want to move on from this slide and talk about how can my team enhance their ability to detect phishing emails. Before you answer, Rob, I happen to know that phishing emails are still one of the biggest ways that cyber criminals get into the infrastructure by imitating somebody in certain ways, whether it's emotional through loyalty, and then the knee-jerk reaction from the employee is to give that cyber criminal what they want, and then in fact that gets us access. Can you expand more on that, Rob?
Yeah, I think if you look at where the majority of security incidents, or what's the source of the majority of security incidents that we're seeing these days, the majority of them are happening through phishing and email compromise. That seems to be the predominant entry point. So, what's a company to do here? Well, it really comes back to really kind of educating your team and establishing a strong, robust cybersecurity awareness training program and a strong security first kind of culture. The couple of things that are important when you're thinking about security awareness training is you want to have a structured phishing campaign. Basically, I want to be able to test. We want to be able to test end users at unexpected times to see what their level of cybersecurity awareness is. So part of a good security training program, end users will be tested on a unexpected way through some crafted specific emails that are intended to get them to click and get them to give up their password and credentials. If we can go ahead and help users understand what does a phishing email look like, helping them to be able to recognize what it is from the beginning is going to lower overall company risk. If we can help our users, frankly, they're low-hanging fruit. Having low-hanging fruit and kind of the front lines, if we're able to go ahead and arm them with information to help them recognize, we're going to go a long way to reducing overall company risk. A couple of things that are also important is to have a robust kind of filtering or spam filtering methodology and system in place to just prevent the stuff from coming in the first place. But it's kind of one of those cat and mouse games where just you're never going to be able to eliminate all of it, but you can dramatically reduce it with appropriate tool sets. Another thing to be important that's important is to have really good security controls internally. So like, for example, what happens then if there's a request for a bank transfer? Having multiple validations, verifications across a particular team before a transaction is made is also really, really important. And having really good reporting mechanisms back so we can go ahead and understand what has been coming in so we can prevent it from happening. And I think the other thing that for programs that have been very successful, it really starts from leadership and having leadership buy-in around the importance of having a robust cybersecurity program, and then having them lead by example.
I have a quick question, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's actually a question for Ryan or you about this. You mentioned training, right? If an employee that getting trained and gets pretend phished and they don't, might feel embarrassed about that because they fell for it. How does that handle where the employees don't feel embarrassed while they're getting trained? Because that would be, I mean, it's obviously it's at least it's training and it's not a real phishing attack, but how do you get that past that?
I think in our experience, it really comes back to how do you handle from a leadership perspective this kind of an event. So I think the implementations that have been most successful is where we're encouraging people to go ahead and report these kinds of things and then rewarding that. It's almost like a reward system, for example, having for example, badges for someone that, hey, reports a particular phishing email that comes in, and then going ahead and not having a culture of blame, but it's really around support and encouragement and trying to reward the behavior of folks coming forward and sharing it, because that's really how people learn. And especially if you have a collaborative environment within your culture, that goes a long way to kind of reducing the shame and using it as more of an educational opportunity. The other thing that we've seen success around is kind of gamification. So if we can make it fun and engaging, a good security awareness training program is going to fill those gaps or fill those requirements. And then, again, collaboration leading from the top and gamification goes a long way to making it very successful.
Sounds good. All right, let's go to the next slide. I don't see it changing yet. Oh, there it is. Probably ask you this, Ryan. Why is relying solely on firewall and antivirus insufficient? Back in the day, we had antivirus and we had firewall, and like that seemed like it kept clients safe. Why is that no longer enough?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. There have really been two emerging changes that we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years that have kind of proven that those two combined technologies are no longer sufficient to protect yourself from today's threat. What we've seen, really, if you think of any attack you've heard of over the last 3 years, every single ransomware attack you've heard of, they have had at least a VM firewall in place when they had the catastrophic event. There are no attacks that you've heard of over the last 3 years when it comes to ransomware where the organization hasn't at least had some form of AV firewall in place. And two things that we've seen really happen. One, since COVID happened, a lot of organizations had to adopt a remote work policy. Remote work policy meant that they needed to open up new sort of doors and windows into their business by allowing remote workers access to their internal infrastructure via different technologies or enabling new cloud services. And this has caused cascading effect where now there are some misconfigurations, new vulnerabilities, there's new entry points for cyber criminals more than ever before into your organization. And the second thing that we've seen happen is really this enhancement in the ability for cyber criminals to make money from attacks. So there's a multitude of ways we're going to chat about here in a second of how criminals can make money from your data. And so the need for layers, sort of like an onion with multiple layers, are critical to stop the threat today. And so more comprehensive monitoring to look for this unusual activity is really essential to defend yourself today.
Rob, let me ask you, when did this happen? Ryan just talked about how we need more. When did this gradual need for more happen? It feels like it wasn't long ago where this was good. When did this change, and why did it change?
Well, it really started since COVID. Effectively, if you think back on how the majority of computer networks are kind of architected and designed, they typically have some flavor of a firewall, some virus protection, some spam filtering, a backup system, and then some level of adoption of two-factor authentication on varying levels. And that typically met the threat. And this is kind of pre-pandemic. The majority of companies are still in this kind of design setup. But what's happened since the pandemic, along the lines of what Ryan has said, with proliferation of cloud services, bring your own device, work from home, that the hackers have been able to really dramatically increase the level of attack. So we've seen a huge increase in ransomware, huge increase in business email compromise, huge increase in phishing. So we have this increased level of threat, but the protections haven't kept pace. And so really what it is for most companies is like there's this big gap now. So that's where some of the layers that Ryan is talking about, and really having holistic and comprehensive visibility over your entire ecosystem is really, really critical to lower company risk. So at this point, most companies are focused on, the device, the endpoint, the laptop, the server, the workstation, but they're missing visibility at the network level, what's passing through the network, Wi-Fi, mobile devices, smart TVs, audio-visual surveillance systems, what's happening also in the cloud systems that we have a lot of confidential data sitting in. For example, Office 365 or Azure, Salesforce, Box, Dropbox, they all contain critical business information that oftentimes are not monitored and reported on, and there's blind spots. So having a system that kind of manages and provides visibility across this entire ecosystem is where we need to get to as a collective society at this point, because the current setup is just not cutting it.
So one of the things I hear you saying, Rob, is that because of the pandemic, some companies were like, hey, you got to stay at office. Some other companies were like, hey, you can remote in, and other companies where you can do a hybrid, but no one was really prepared to set this up securely. And the cyber criminals said, ooh, this is a great opportunity. There's lots of openings beyond what the firewall and antivirus do.
Yeah. I mean, think about it, how were we set up pre-pandemic for the most part? Well, everyone's in the office and we had a kind of our big corporate firewall that was kind of like the walled fortress, and we were all behind that. Everybody's spread out and distributed now, and the protections haven't extended to those remote distribution points. Then you layer in cloud availability and so forth, and not having visibility over those systems, and there's a lot of gaps.
So, just to ask you a very specific question, Rob or Ryan, whoever wants to answer. I mean, this is a rudimentary question for me, but I just want to know, what does a firewall do now and what doesn't it do? In other words, I know what a firewall is supposed to do. It's supposed to be like the moat around the castle. And now you're saying that things are so amplified that it's not enough. So if somebody has a firewall, what is that doing? And then what isn't it doing? I'd love to know very specifically, if you don't mind.
You want to take that, Ryan? I can chime in.
Yeah, I can certainly add some detail there. So right now, a firewall is basically protecting your internet internally within your network from being completely visible to the outside world. So it is, in essence, kind of acting like if you're going into a restaurant or a bar, there's a door person there that's checking IDs for people that are coming in. And it's the same idea. It's kind of what it's doing. Now, what it isn't doing right now is that if you can imagine, if it's like the outside wall, what if there were a whole bunch of different, tunnels from, the surrounding ground into this area, and bridges over the wall, and a whole bunch of different new access ways that don't have somebody present to check who's accessing. There are new entry points into the organization. It's not all just being funneled through one door. And so these new entry points, like cloud services, for instance, if you lose your credentials to your 365, anyone can log into 365. It's not hosted in your network on an exchange server anymore, where it's sitting behind a firewall. It's now accessible from cloud. Any device in the world that has internet access can connect into it. So the protection is still important to have a firewall to protect what's going on inside your organization. And many organizations will need to maintain a firewall. But the scope of the network has expanded greatly outside of just what's sitting inside your office. As Rob had mentioned, now remote users, cloud applications, and things like that.
So I wanna recap that metaphor, but we have a question, so I have to pause my own recap. Thank you so much, Paul, for asking a question. I'm going to read it out loud so we can get our experts to answer. You said the majority of attacks are through phishing emails. Approximately what would that percentage be? If I'm already using a phishing identification tool with notification, how is that still compromised?
Yeah, so I can take that. At this point, we're looking at roughly, like some of the numbers I've been seeing is that Phishing emails kind of comprise 60 to 70% of most of the malicious breaches that are out there. The thing around what's happening with, you mentioned your ID system. Not quite sure, how that's structured, but in general, you want to have. You can go ahead and have, for example, a person can impersonate and get into a particular user account. They can be physically in some other location, and being able to kind of correlate that with known devices or known systems that are kind of under management to go ahead and alert to the possibility. You can't be in two places at once, right? So if you're able to have a system that's distributed enough that is able to look at valid logins from known trusted users, and then invalid logins that are still maybe successful, but they're coming from a different physical location, and being able to correlate that, so that kind of flags itself, right? Maybe Ryan, if you want to kind of chime in on that and add some additional color, but being able to, like, impossible travel is kind of like one of the kind of like common kind of industry term for being able to identify a malicious attempt, malicious login from non-standard different locations that physically you can't be in both places at once.
Yeah, and I know we're running up against time, so I'll try and keep this brief. One of the more challenging attack techniques that can circumvent phishing, like spam filters or tools that are intended to stop phishing emails when they're coming through, are supply chain attacks. And a supply chain attack would make reference to, let's say, somebody you do business with has had their email compromised, and then the bad guy or the cyber criminal is now emailing you from a legitimate domain. So they're not emailing you from a malicious domain or a spoofed domain, one that's like a one-off. They're emailing you from a legitimate domain, and that's not going to get stopped by your spam filter or your phishing identification tool. It's going to pass right through to your users. And so, as Rob mentioned earlier, the best way to train staff right now to date is implementing a proven training program and model that's going to help educate your users on what to look for when it comes to these types of emails.
Well, that was a great question. Great answers, Rob and Ryan. Thank you, Paul. We encourage anybody to ask more questions. Just to go back to what we were talking about antivirus. What I heard you say metaphorically is this: back in the day, pre-pandemic, you had a firewall, and that was the moat around the castle. Let's say a wall around the castle, and the bad guys used to climb with a hook, and they'd climb over the wall, and then we would stop them with the wall. And now they've got all kinds of bad techniques. I just had to get my metaphor out. They got oil, and they've got grow under the wall, they can smash through the wall. And that's why a firewall does a certain piece, but there's a lot of other ways they can get in, and you need a lot of other layers. I apologize for simplifying it, but I had to bookend that. So let's go to the next slide. What do cyber criminals do with my stolen data? Yeah, I mean, what is the value of stealing data?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Cyber criminals are leveraging online marketplaces on the dark web to sell data. So there's a lot of data that people are transacting online for money or cryptocurrency. They're selling credit card information. They're selling username and password data to different cloud applications, web applications, maybe network protocols or email applications. They're selling personally identifiable data that could be used to future a phishing attack. That could be used for entry into an application like ChatGPT to create a more sophisticated phishing attack. They're using personal health information. They're trading intellectual property from businesses and private business information. And they leverage these exchanges to trade this data, because not all cyber criminals can do everything. Not all cyber criminals are experts at designing malware or software. Not all experts or not all criminals are experts at network or social engineering or phishing attacks. And so they need to, trade some of the information that they've got and trade data to help further their attacks. And that's really what we're seeing with some of that stolen data.
So at 11:30 Pacific Coast time, I have a question for you, Ryan, but I want us to just go to our next slide, just so that those of you that just, well, I was going to bring it back, Rob. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just thinking that it just kind of hammer this home is around just like a real world example. This is something that, I'm from the Bay Area, and a couple of months ago, the city of Oakland had a ransomware event. And what ended up happening is that they got compromised. It actually originated through a phishing email. And the hackers went back to the city of Oakland and basically, demanded the ransom. City of Oakland said, no, we're not going to pay it. The hackers had basically gone in and started to exfiltrate or basically suck out data out of that network. And what they ended up doing was they posted online the complete list of city employees of City of Oakland, including all their personal information, everything that you would need to steal their identities. And this included everybody up into current mayor and actually the past mayor. So this is kind of going back to, kind of Ryan's point on what hackers are doing with the data. They're using this to inflict really severe reputational damage on a particular company, and really leveraging this to go ahead and try and exfiltrate, kind of extract as much money as they can out of a particular ransomware victim.
So I have a question about what they're going to do. Before I do, I want to go to the last slide, because I like to be respectful of everyone's time, and it is 11:33 Pacific, 2:30 East Coast. So everyone, we're going to keep the discussion going. But if you're wondering, hey, what's next? We wanted to make sure you know that you have two options. You could email us now at secure@itsasap.com. That means, hey, I want to get more information. Do a scan. We can tell you where we think the points to be concerned about, make some recommendations. Or you could reach out directly to your client account manager. I know everybody has busy days, so I wanted to make sure you have this information. Now, if it's okay, Chloe, if we could go back to that last question. I think that, Rob, one thing that you talk about that I think you assume everybody knows what it is, and this is me kind of asking extra questions, so I appreciate those that want to hang. But what does somebody need my information for? I'm not the mayor of anything. What would someone benefit from getting my health information? Like you mentioned that earlier, and I don't understand.
What happens when you steal somebody's identity? What can you do?
I don't know.
You can go ahead and impersonate them. You can go ahead and start credit accounts in their name. You can go ahead and file paperwork that allows you to go ahead and take advantage of anything that you're digitally impersonating somebody. Anything that we do as individuals can be going ahead, and you can set that up in an alter ego, alter identity, and leverage that, and then really screw somebody's credit over, really take advantage of them from a financial perspective. You think about what happens from a company perspective, right? Reputational damage, client loss, just it can have a dramatic impact on the business. Oftentimes, if somebody is victim to a large, ransomware type of event, many companies go out of business altogether. So if you think about it just from an extrapolation perspective, it really kind of creates a lot of damage and potential risk for folks at an individual level, but also expanded up to a company level as well. Ryan, you want to chime in on anything?
Yeah, and I do want to hear that, Ryan. So if I got my ID hacked, what would be the ramifications for me, Ryan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And anybody who has staff or coworkers within any business is in the same boat. So Matt works at ITS. And if Matt was to be compromised in any way, even if we just gained access to some personal information of Matt's, we could use that information to do reconnaissance on Matt in general. And then we could start to formulate guesses for passwords to applications he may use. Now, let's say we were able to use that information in tandem with ChatGPT, which is a good and easy example, to create lists of potential passwords that Matt may use, pet names, birth dates, personal information about Matt that we've obtained online.
I don't love being the example here, but keep going.
And we could use that to gain entry into his email. And then once we've gained entry into his email, or any employee in your business's email, they can now pretend and impersonate that person in interactions with coworkers to try and, which means I can look on LinkedIn, I can easily see, well, who's the IT person in the business, or who's the CEO or the CFO or the accounting person, or who's somebody within that business that I want to pretend to interact with to try and take their password information, maybe send them some malware, maybe send them a link that's going to steal all the passwords from their browser. Then I can perpetuate this attack. I can start to work my way through the organization. So Rob made some great points. I mean, you could also just go and open up a credit card if I have access to your personal information, and then go and make a bunch of online transactions fraudulently, or get a new cell phone and then use that to create a new attack. But it's really about a series of steps, and just obtaining that initial data may, you never know whose hands it could get into through some sort of online exchange.
So one thing I wanted to say, and I know we still have a number of people hanging with us, which I appreciate. So I'm going to ask them, put in your Zoom chat, if you would, tell us about a hack that you've heard of. That's your region, and we'll see if we know anything about it, and if we can give you some insight on around that hack. There's some big ones out there, but I like asking people, because I always find that people have different perspectives on a hack. So I just wanted to put that to our attendees. We still have 7 people watching, so we can go back to oh yeah, Paul, I can see your chat. I can see your chat here. So Paul said, can we enable the chat? I think it is, Paul. So if anybody writes something, I think we can see it. I don't know if it's visible to everybody, but
yeah, I think that the way it's set up right now, people just pop in a question into the Q&A.
Gotcha. So yeah, that's how I saw your question earlier, Paul. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So, we still have some people here, and if anybody has any questions, if not, I wanted to go back and ask a little bit more about the AI situation. But somebody said SAF Holland in Holland, Michigan, cyber attack. Do you know anything about that one, Ryan or Rob? SAF Holland in Holland, Michigan.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one per se. Maybe one that I can talk about that I've heard about recently is the MGM attack.
Oh, okay.
So that was that. There's a couple things happened there. So in the MGM attack, this affected a whole series of casinos in Las Vegas. Now MGM Grand, they basically have I think it's like 14 or 15 different properties throughout Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and Michigan, and they got infiltrated through a social engineering campaign that they got. I think a higher end person's information via LinkedIn, and they called up and were able to gain access through getting their MFA and user account kind of reset. And that granted them access into a whole series of systems within that environment, and they were able to go ahead and ransomware that environment. They were down for, I think, almost like 2.5 weeks. One of the things I can talk to especially was that I was actually at a conference in one of their properties about 2 weeks after the event occurred, and they were still actually after a little over 2 weeks, they were only about 70 to 80% up and running. And I started asking some of the team members and employees like what the situation was like. How did they deal with that? And a lot of the stuff that I got back was they were unable to process any digital transaction. So they went back to paper effectively for a while. If you were in a kind of like a takeout place and you wanted to get some food, they took cash for I think 5 or 6 days after the initial attack, because they couldn't transact a credit card, they couldn't transact anything digitally. If you were like logging in, if you're checking into the hotel, they had to physically take you up to the rooms because the card keys didn't work anymore. And Matt, we've had this discussion. I think you actually had a friend that works there, and one of the things that was kind of interesting was that the casino really makes its money through the high rollers, right? So you have folks that are coming in and they want to, lay down a lot of money, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars or larger. And are they bringing that money when they go to visit the casino? No.
No.
What they're doing is they're establishing a line of credit and then having that bank transfer, happen on the back end, right? Guess what? They couldn't do that. And so they're losing just significant sums of money because like a lot of the high rollers were not able to transact.
But let me ask you this. What if they have cyber insurance? We talk about all these breaches, but people have cyber insurance, then they're covered.
Cyber insurance is kind of like the being at the ICU at the hospital, right? The event has occurred and you're basically just trying to resuscitate the patient, right? So it really comes back to kind of cyber insurance is kind of like it's an after the fact thing versus a preventive proactive thing. So really kind of going back and having those preemptive setups in place to prevent the attack in the first place, or at least being able to minimize the impact of that said attack. That's where kind of having this kind of preventive, proactive monitoring and alerting system really becomes really crucial. Ryan, you want to add anything to that around cyber insurance?
Yeah, just to add on that side of things, a lot of folks feel, and it's interesting to hear actually when this comes up, like that cyber insurance is going to take care of everything. One of the most, I think, the considerations that many people fail to give when it comes to a cyber attack is, let's say that you're down for a period of time, and the SAF Holland attack actually is a good example where they were down for a period of up to 14 days, 2 weeks. And the MGM Grand is a good example as well. If your business is unable to generate revenue during a period of time, that is just money that you are not going to be reimbursed by cyber insurance. It's just money that your business is no longer capturing. And that lost revenue it can have a massive impact on your business. Because if you're giving consideration to, hey, we've got expenses covered for a period of time, and that's really contingent upon the replenishment from revenues on a monthly basis and a daily basis, and then you aren't able to conduct normal business operations and obtain those revenues, it can have a serious impact on your business. And as Rob mentioned earlier, this is why we see a lot of small, medium business end up going out of business or closing the doors. If they're not able to operate for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, then they've burned through a month worth of expenses in cash. And they don't have the cash flow to support it. And so if they've got about a month's worth of money in the bank to cover expenses for the upcoming month and are expecting revenues to replenish that pool, and then they don't get it, and because of a result of an attack, the door is shut, and insurance money isn't going to cover that loss of revenue.
I have a question to read from one of the attendees. It says, my local Las Vegas bank was compromised, and internally the hacker changed my verification information to his address to enable fraudulent wire transfers out of my account. What defense recourse would the ordinary customer have when the bank refuses to take responsibility? That's a toughie.
Yeah, enabling credit monitoring is going to be one of the first things. So sometimes when you see financial institutions compromised, or you see institutions compromised where financial information is lost, the credit monitoring service is provided for a period of time, 1, 2, or 3 years. And if that's not in this case, that would be a recommendation out of the gates to enable some sort of credit monitoring service, so that if there is any type of fraudulent activity, and then, historically, and I'm not advising anybody or providing any particular advice, but small claims is generally the next, is the only recourse you would have, is to pursue that direction, which may or may not work for you. But generally speaking, enabling some sort of credit monitoring to watch your credit in the event of financial information loss is recommended.
Well, I wanted to jump in because I've been hosting these webinars, and I think we should do more. I think we should do a whole webinar on AI. And I want to say to the person that's the anonymous attendee, based on me hosting these webinars, what I've learned is that there are countries that are almost encouraging malicious behavior, and that if those countries get your money, those countries' governments are extremely uncooperative with the American government to help root out those criminals and get your money back. So that if, I'm afraid to say a country, but if a country is encouraging that hacking, and then you go to that country and say, "Hey, I'd like you to help report those criminals. They took my money." That country's not going to be helpful. And maybe I'm being, simplistic here, but you tell me, Rob, is that I was trying to give that person unfortunately, an answer. It's not a good answer, but maybe I'm missing something, Rob.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add in that particular question right now.
No, but I just meant as far as you've mentioned before that governments are not cooperative when business funds get. So if somebody gets ransomware and they have to pay, and the criminals live in a foreign country that we don't have a good relationship with, that country is not going to be very helpful to us in getting that money back. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's going to be tough. I think in certain regulations I've seen that I think the U.S. has been stating that they if we, as like say a company got compromised and the compromise came from a non-cooperative enemy nation state, that the U.S. would prevent a ransom being paid out. So like it's basically Ryan, if you want to chime in on this a little bit, if you've heard that. I've heard that basically the government would basically kind of step in and just prevent a ransomware payment to a hostile nation state.
Yeah, and a lot of what's happening is that, and Matt sort of alluded to this initially. There are countries where they do not prosecute cybercrime if the crime is occurring on foreign soil. So this enables operations within that country to form like businesses of cyber criminals and experts that can conduct attacks against foreign countries and not face prosecution. So from the criminal side of things, they're illegal to operate the way they're operating. And so the only interruption of that, to Rob's point, is really have the government say like, "Hey, we're not like ransomware. Paying ransomware can be considered a criminal activity and isn't allowed to occur in some of these cases." It's a tricky situation, and it's why there's been some sometimes cybercrime goes unreported because organizations may be fearful for, saying that they've paid ransom or are going to pay ransom. Paying ransom doesn't always mean you're going to get your data back. Cyber criminals, they've done something bad in the first place, and you don't necessarily want to trust those people that they're going to do the right thing. And so we've seen many cases where, and also the technology they're using to like encrypt all of the systems, it's not necessarily tested software that you expect to decrypt everything like a good application would.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for attending. Those that are attending, there is a question that we'll type out an answer to because I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we've gone well past a half hour. Let us know what you'd like another webinar on. My vote is that we do some more on AI because I think there's lots of questions to be answered there. And can you go to the prior slide real fast because I think it's worth repeating. We hope that if you have questions, that you'll reach out to us. The two ways to easily contact us, one would be email us at secure@itsasap.com. And if not, talk to your VCIO or your client account manager and let them know that you have questions or would like next steps. I want to thank Ryan and Rob for giving us such great answers. And I want to thank you, panelists, for asking questions and engaging with us. We hope to continue to keep you safe. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Bye, everyone.